Hey guys, so I'm doing another scene breakdown, and instead of doing a movie that sucks, I'm gonna do a movie that I absolutely love, and it's the 2018 film Burning, directed by chang-dong. Very talented filmmaker, super intelligent filmmaker. Um, and I just the reason why I wanted to talk about this movie is I um I showed this movie to my girlfriend, and she liked it. And as I was watching it, I just felt kind of compelled to want to talk about this scene right here with these three. Because this, if you've seen the movie, and by the way, I'm going to spoil the movie. So if you haven't seen it, and you're watching this, then why are you watching this video? If you haven't seen the movie, watch the movie. I'll let you borrow a copy. But yeah, this scene is relatively essential because it is the what's what I'm looking for. It's the transitioning into the second half of the movie. If you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, the thing about this movie. Oh, by the way, I wanted to say that if I sound different, I'm still trying to get over having a cold. So sorry if I don't sound the best right now. I'm still trying to get over this cold right now, so I'm not sounding great right now. But yeah, I was gonna do this yesterday. I feel better yesterday than I did today, if that makes any sense. But but yeah, this scene is very essential, and I've been thinking about this scene a lot, especially long after recently watching it. And I thought I'd just go ahead and do a scene breakdown of this scene. So if you haven't seen the movie, well, if you have, let me put it this way: if you have seen the movie, then you should know what it's about. It's about how this main character, what's his name? I have to get on IMDb. Lee Jong-soo. That's the character's name. Lee Jong-soo is the main character. He's sort of the central character, and he's in love with this character, whose name is Shin. So she's in love with Shin, and they meet this guy. He's familiar. They meet Ben, pretty much Ben, and basically she mysteriously disappears after this scene. And once he's had a moment, intimate moment with her, and she spends time with her, and they start to sort of reconnect in a way. But what happens is, like I said, she disappears, and the movie's sort of like this dramatic mystery about what happened to her. And the movie does a really good job at not only not telling you exactly what happened, but the film gives you a lot of clues and subtleties that can lead to various conclusions that would be, reasonable and would make sense to how she disappeared. So yeah, it's a great example of how to establish a mystery, but not make the mystery, not to conventionalize the mystery element. But yeah, the reason why this scene is essential is because, like I said, not only is it a transitioning to that second act where she disappears, but it also really establishes more layers of these characters. It really is like that moment that really gives us a lot of depth with these characters, so that what happens next, really is an effective second half. So basically, I want to get into the characters first because, like I said, this is a movie that's really hard to talk about without. It's a hard movie to talk about. This scene is hard to talk about without, talking about the whole movie. Because, like I said, the movie is there's so many things to pick apart and analyze in the film, and you kind of have to explain a lot of the context of this scene, as well as what happens afterwards, because the characters in this film they're mysterious. They're all mysterious, odd characters, while simultaneously being very complex and have subtleties in their character traits that, like I said, it's not in your face, so they don't spell it out for you, but they really give the audience a chance to experience these characters in a way that feels real. So you feel like you're really experiencing real people with dimension, rather than a movie having to spoon feed you who these characters are and their layers and depth They're really subtle with how they develop and evolve these characters. So excuse me. So yeah, what I want to start with, I have to kind of start from the beginning. Like there's a scene before this, sort of semi before this, where they go to a restaurant. And the one thing I want to say about this movie is, and I if I was smart, I would have added another scene. There's a couple of scenes that's actually really brilliant in terms of blocking. The way they block the actors is already saying a lot on a visual level. So basically, one solid example is Shin is always in the center. She's usually in the center. At one point in time, Ben is in the center in an earlier scene. Like I said, I wish I would have had it, but it's like once, what's his name? Once Lee, I should remember this by now. Once Lee kind of accepts that Ben is in the picture, it seems like, to my interpretation, Shin is in the center, and she's in the center from this scene to the next, if I'm not mistaken. And a lot of that is kind of part of that, sort of that love triangle thing. But the thing is, it's not really a love triangle, because the only person that really professes that he loves Shin is Lee. Ben hasn't really professed his love or anything for her, but he does like sort of communicate some sort of interest in her, which is also an important thing to take note of about the second half. But yeah, we see here, like I said, very subtle. She's blocked here in the middle, and then here she's blocked. Let me see. There's a great, really interesting way they pan. They got these sort of like these rich people, these rich stuck-up people. This is pretty interesting too in terms of blocking. Lee he's trying to sort of, like, he smokes obviously, but he's trying to sort of fit in ish, but not really. He's like he's making an attempt to fit in. So we see him sort of in the center, and we see these rich people sort of like next to him, and it's sort of like outside of him. But it's an attempt to sort of connect and fit in, but not really, because he's not really. If you know the character, he's very unreadable, and he's not entirely somebody that tries to open up or relate. So this is a pretty interesting moment for him to attempt to do that. So yeah, this is the scene where we have a slow panning, and we see, her in the center. She's sort of blocked in the middle. I really like, and this is just an interpretation, but I really like the panning of this scene and how it pans over to Ben. And the reason why I do like that scene is because, like I said, there's an earlier scene, and maybe I'll just, maybe I'll just add it I'll add it post in my editing. I'll add the scene in when he's walking, and he sort of appears in frame, and when he appears in frame, he's sort of over top of Shin and Lee. So I thought that was a pretty interesting way, but I like how he sort of appears in frame here too, in a sense where it's like a really smooth in frame reminder that he's just in Shin's life, in a way that Lee sort of wants to be, but not really. But this scene also says a lot about Shin's character too. Shin is a character that is, she seems to be very expressive. She sees it to the perspective of like these rich stuck-up weirdos. She's very odd, but she's clearly somebody that doesn't have much but longs for more, is I think the best thing you can say. Early in the film we see her apartment. It's a very small, tiny apartment. There's not much there, and there's not much that she has, but she longs for more outside of her small environment. She goes to Africa and she shares her experiences, and the only way she could have gone to Africa is because of Ben, right? Ben is clearly seen as somebody who's a rich guy, so she clearly has he has accesses to give her, these experiences. And this scene is important too, where she explains that they do an African dance that, she says in the subtitles, great hunger. So yeah, as they dance, let's see, I'll play the video too if I can remember where the play button is. Wow, I don't know how to use my own editing software. What the heck? Where did it go? Was there not a play button and I'm just going crazy? Oh, there it is. But she, as you can see, she talks about how there's a great hunger dance. The great hunger dance goes from little to big. And I think that's a really interesting thing too, is that I think from my opinion, this scene of her explaining the dance, talking about, little hunger to great hunger, I think that can say a lot about her. She says little hunger and then into great hunger. And she does the dance. And I think it just, it communicates how she has a growing desire for more, outside of where she is, And so she has a little dance. And the one thing to also take note of when she does her dance is the perspective of the rich people. It's almost like they're just kind of using her as just a form of entertainment. Like, she's clearly, poor, but they can't really relate to that perspective of longing, because I'm pretty sure they have everything they need. They're seen to be, just Ben's rich friends. So yeah, and clearly she's, using this dance is something that she has that resonated with her in a sense. And it resonates with her because, she also longs for something great. And then we have, a really popular, really notable scene from people that love this movie where Ben is doing a fake yawn. And then he looks at Lee. Yeah, I think that right there can kind of give us a lot of a hint about how Ben sees Shin. He doesn't really have that same passionate feeling for Shin. Like I said, he just he finds her interesting, but, you can find somebody interesting and the implications can be positive or negative, So, then that's why it's important to get to this scene. And I was going to talk about this scene too, but I don't know. It's one of those scenes that feels like if I was talking about the entire movie, I would talk about how she fell in a well and Lee found her. Like that, because that's a whole other element that I can talk about on my own, but I feel like it's not really the central focus of the video. So, like I said, there's a lot of subtleties here in this scene. They're smoking weed. I think it's safe to say that Lee's never smoked weed before, because he has a little coughing episode, and the only people that know what they're doing is Shin and Ben. I actually do I'm not gonna lie, I like how smooth Ben was with the smoking. Like, he was smooth with it. You have Lee coughing, and then you have just Ben just like, yeah. Smooth, man, just smooth. I don't like, this character's not supposed to be somebody we like, but like, I'm just saying, man, like, he was a smooth brother. I'm just saying. So yeah, like I said, there's a lot of subtleties in, who they are. Ben is somebody who's clearly has a certain degree of being in control. Has nothing really seems to damper him. I don't know what that means. Like, I'm not, you know what I mean. But he seems sort of immovable in a way. I don't know. It's hard to explain. And Shin, Shin's somebody who has a lot more of a giggly personality, giggly experience, giggly enjoyment of the weed. And, you know, Ben is just somebody who seems to just do this all the time. So at least that's how it is to me. So then we have the really famous dance scene. I can't play the whole thing because, you know, her sets are out, so I can't play the whole thing. But this scene isn't actually. This is a very. I did as many times as I watched this scene. I found this scene recently to be fairly emotional, and I had a very emotional response to this scene. Not only that, but there's a certain song that plays by Miles Davis, and I can't pronounce it very well, but I'm gonna try my best. It is pronounced Jernekwi. If you're in the comments, please help me pronounce this. But basically, the meaning of the song, based off of what I found on Bing or Google, is a profound exploration of themes such as melancholy, longing, and the complexities of love and loss. And it's amazing how perfect of a song that was to pick for this moment. Like I said, I don't want to play too much of it because copyright, but I'll see if I can play a little bit of a glimpse of it real quick. But it's such a beautiful piece of music, and you know the themes of the song itself really tying with the themes that are being explored in this particular scene. You know, and in many ways there's subtleties in, you know, the actress that plays Shin. You know, there's a certain degree of the images where you can see that she is longing for freedom. You know, at some point in time, you know, she signs a bird. And, you know, a bird obviously represents freedom. And, you know, it's... Oh, God, this scene is so... I forgot. Sometimes this scene is so beautiful. I mean, why else would they use this scene in the poster? You know, like, it's so perfect. And, you know, she ends up doing the hunger dance. And what I really like about her doing the hunger dance in this scene is that it's done... Instead of doing it to, you know, in a sense, to showcase it to other people, she's doing this dance in such a personal and passionate way. And it's so, you know, and it's so beautiful how passionate she is and how much she's expressing and showing so much freedom and in what she's trying to communicate with the dance. You know, even if she's not aware of what she's communicating because she's high. You know, on the subconscious part, you know, she's doing this dance as a way to show something, you know, show longing, you know, because she talks about how she wants this and that, you know, and how she wants, you know, she goes to Africa, but she comes back, but is that really enough? You know, you always want experiences, more and more experiences, especially if you are longing for something more. And as somebody that, you know, she definitely, that the character herself with context is that she is somebody that has, you know, doesn't really have much. And later on in this scene, later on in the film, we learn that, you know, when she disappears and she talks about the well. So I lied. The well scene does have some sort of relevance because she does talk about how she was in a well. And I think when Lee asked about the well later in the film, their parents, or I think her family members, are trying to deny the existence of the well, but his mom seems to legitimately be aware that there was a well, and it almost shows that, you know, you could say that her family is lying about the well. They're lying about what she says because they turn around and say that she's lying about these things. She always makes up stories. So there could be a sense where her family denies her, you know, because she doesn't talk about her family much. And it seems like, you know, there's just this sort of obliviousness or this disinterest in even talking about her past experiences with her family members. So it's an interesting way to see things. Once the song is over, you know, we see that the implication of the scene is a lot more clear, you know, when she starts to, you know, cry, you know, she starts to be emotional about after she danced, because it's like, you know, she wants more. So then after this, we cut to them talking, and I find it interesting that Lee starts to, abruptly open up to Ben, and he talks about, how his father basically. I'll give him some context to the scene. His father is on trial for an assault charge, and his father was somebody that has anger problems. He's unstable, and let me see later on. Yeah, he talks about how his father reacted unreasonably when the mom left, and he forced her to burn her clothes, which is something that it can be seen as unreasonable behavior, an unreasonable response. And I think this explains why Lee is so unreadable, emotionally unreadable, occasionally emotionally withdrawn, because it could be just like, he just has a lot of these past experiences, and it kind of bottles up how it made him feel. So that's one thing that's pretty interesting. He talks about how he has dreams of it, which sometimes, can be related to trauma in a sense. It could have been a traumatic experience, having to have to deal with, how his father might have reacted to his mom leaving the family, and she left because his father, was unstable. And I think it's pretty simple. What the movie is trying to say about Lee too. It's not the only thing the film is saying about him, that he does kind of manage to carry his father's unstable traits, but there's subtleties in that implication earlier in the film, and also later on in the movie, it becomes more clear. But the way that that's utilized is in a way where it seems to make sense, because spoiler alert, he does murder Ben by the end of the movie, and the justification for it makes more sense. It's not like he unjustly killed an innocent person, but he killed somebody that he knew all along had to do with Shin's disappearance. And like I said before, it really says a lot about this scene itself. These two says there's some, and at least this is my interpretation, but I feel like there's a lot of interesting similarities between them, as people that are either unstable or just they have questionable, morally odd, mentalities. But he talks about how, let me see, actually I didn't notice that. Oh yeah, he talks about how he burns greenhouses. Now, my girlfriend actually put two and two together faster than I could about how once every 2 months he burns greenhouses. Now, if he is responsible for Shin's appearance, then it's pretty clear what he's doing once every 2 months. That's not just burning greenhouses, you know what I mean? For all we know, he could be putting women in the greenhouses and setting them on fire. Just something crazy. Because obviously you got to get rid of evidence. And he talks about how the Korean police don't care about that. I don't know how much much about Korea's law enforcement system, but he talks about how they don't really care about those things. It's not because they don't care about him, obviously, being victimizing, women, but it's just like, you can get away with something like that because they don't care about greenhouses in a rural area. When you're in a rural area with a lot of fields, they're not going to sit there and go over to a greenhouse and call the emergency, but yeah, I like the subtlety here is like they both seem relatively unstable without it being obvious. I remember watching this scene when he talks about how he had dreams of his father burning the clothes, and he kind of has this little laugh, and it's just kind of made me wonder what's going on in his head. He he does this sort of chuckle and smile. And it's not always like it's not clearly not like a happy, positive response, but it's more just like, that's all you can really do in a situation that you experienced as a kid, and you still think about it. It's like you kind of just accept that it happened, and you just laugh about it. It's a really it's how we deal with some things. Is that we kind of our minds try to replace how we really feel with a different emotion that can be implied as positive. And it's sort of like a coping thing too. But yeah, I've always done. That's some good acting too, like excellent acting. So it's like they kind of share their oddness without it being obvious. And Ben, I think what I like about how Ben is portrayed by, hang on, Steven Yeun. Steven Yeun is like, everybody knows who Steven Yeun is. I gotta say, it was a pretty smart marketing ploy to get him into the movie so that people can see it, because obviously he's from, a lot of American films. But what I like about Ben is just, you can see, like, Ben is not only mysterious, but when he communicates these things, that mysteriousness is more solidified. Like, why is he burning greenhouses? And he finds an adrenaline rush for doing it. And a lot of Stevie Yeun's acting here is great at not being clear about who this guy is. And he plays this mysteriousness very well. And the way the character communicates how he likes to burn greenhouses is clearly, let me see. It's like rain. Oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting line. Now that I think about it, there's no right or wrong there. The mores of nature. The mores of nature are like simultaneous existence. I didn't really. I think with that line, now that I think about it, that line kind of shows that he, in his mind, has a certain degree of control and omniscience over what happens. If that makes sense, like over the things that he does. That certain omniscience is something that he's trying to, communicate to him, especially when he clearly is doing these crimes every 2 months. It's like his mark is on there, and his action is there, but it doesn't really matter because he won't be caught for it. If that makes sense. And that adrenaline and that rush of being able to do these things and get away with it, I feel like that's what he's trying to communicate on a deeper level. So, oh man, yeah, this line definitely kind of solidifies the transitioning of the second half. I mean, it's pretty wild. What do you think that means? And it's, what really makes this scene all the more effective is that as they're talking, and this is what I'm saying about how this movie can feel very real. As they're talking, the sun is slowly going down, and it just kind of adds to this uneasiness and just this engagement, and and it's like. It's pretty interesting. I wouldn't even say it's a coincidence that Lee brings up, Shin, how he's in love with her. Right after they talk about, it's time for, a greenhouse. And he says he loves her. It's pretty interesting. Not entirely coincidental, but definitely intentional with that dialogue. And then I think this scene too, this scene kind of shows what I was saying about how Lee can carry traits of his father, but the film doesn't make it sledgehammered information. So, he tells her something that's very disrespectful. Yeah, so I'm not saying that that's something that his father might have exactly said to his mom, but you can tell that he, much like his father, can be unreasonable, and maybe it's very clear that Lee is somebody that is unable to express how he feels about Shin, but instead of, being more open about how he feels, he decides to once again replace those feelings with saying something that kind of helps establish what's the word, a distance, really, because it's not like he's gonna straight up tell her that he loves her, but it's like because of those feelings he's kind of getting them mixed in with maybe a certain degree of disdain, but it's not really disdain though, and once again it's like that instability that his father sort of carries as well. And yes, this is the last time we see Shin, and the way they leave is such a bitter, cold moment where he says something so demeaning to her, and I think that's another thing. Oh, it's shot so beautiful. I think another thing that I actually really like about how he figures out what happened to her and how Ben is involved is that it's sort of like a redemption story for him almost, because even though they leave on this really dark, abrupt note where he says something so demeaning to her, he does sort of have a redemption moment where he avenges her loss, or avenges her disappearance, and that's how I interpret it. But once again, this is a hard movie to talk about unless I talk about the whole movie. So maybe I'll do some more breakdowns of this movie. It's very layered. You know what I mean? It's a very layered and complex movie. But yeah, that's kind of all I wanted to say about this particular scene. Like I said, it's hard to really say more. But yeah, and it also sucks that I'm trying to do this while not feeling great. But yeah, this is kind of what I want to do as a scene breakdown. I wanted to talk about this scene. So, yeah, like I said, maybe I'll talk more about this movie in the future. I don't know. I got some other stuff that I want to do too, and a lot of things I want to talk about. So yeah, if you like this, this breakdown, hopefully you did. Like and subscribe, and I'll try to keep this going if you like them. Just let me know in the comments. All right, I will see y'all later, and bye.